Well, let's talk about this extended truce between China and the U.S. that was announced by President Trump.
I think that President Trump didn't have much of a choice because China is in a very strong position to negotiate.
If China is operating from a power position, what about Canada?
In early August, two very different trade stories played out. In Washington, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day extension of the U.S.-China tariff truce. The White House presented it as a way to buy more time and secure new deals on U.S. chip exports and energy sales to China. Beijing, meanwhile, still controls most of the world's rare earth production and had just opened new zero-tariff access to dozens of African nations, boosting its own negotiating power. But while Trump lowered tensions with Beijing, the pressure on Canada stayed the same. Since August 1st, Canadian goods that don't qualify under USMCA rules have faced a 35% U.S. tariff, up from 25% in late July. There's still no sign of a cut, and Ottawa hasn't received any of the temporary tariff breaks that Mexico managed to secure. The contrast is clear. One neighbor gets more time, the other gets more heat. For Trump, tariffs are more than just an economic tool, they're a bargaining weapon. The official reasons for them change, often border security, fentanyl, dairy, even unrelated areas like banking. With China, the 90-day truce came with specific terms: more U.S. chips from companies like Nvidia, more American ethane for Chinese factories, and the unspoken understanding that Beijing's dominance in critical minerals gives it serious leverage with Canada. The approach is different. Keeping tariffs high maintains pressure ahead of a possible early USMCA renegotiation. It limits Ottawa's breathing room and pushes Canadian negotiators toward making concessions to avoid more escalation. Trump's history with other partners, from the EU's capped 15% rates to Switzerland's 39%, shows how he uses these numbers to lock in tough bargaining positions.
We are in a difficult position with the U.S. We're subject now to a tariff of 35%. We have to put in place a very elaborate plan to diversify our exports.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided rushing into retaliatory moves, choosing instead a mix of steady dialogue and visible domestic support. In July, Ottawa announced over $1 billion Canadian in measures to protect the steel sector. These included procurement rules favoring Canadian steel and aluminum, funding to retrain affected workers, and infrastructure investments to stabilize supply. These measures aim to absorb some of the market shock from U.S. tariffs, which since June 4th have reached as high as 50% on U.S. imports of Canadian steel and aluminum. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, about 6 to 6.5 million tons of steel lost access to the U.S. market because of these tariffs. The domestic plan creates a 2 to 2.5 million ton opportunity for Canadian producers, a first step in reducing reliance on U.S. buyers.
Europe is an obvious partner. It has a very mature economy. They're interested in all kinds of goods that we can export.
But we will also work with new partners, or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
At the same time, Canada is strengthening ties with the European Union. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, most goods already trade tariff-free, but new talks are focusing on aligning industrial strategies in sectors like steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. With a market of roughly 450 million people and stable rules, the EU offers a reliable alternative that reduces Canada's exposure to U.S. tariff swings. Trump's strategy is built on speed. Apply tariffs, create immediate pressure, and extract concessions quickly. Carney's approach is built on endurance. Strengthen domestic industries, diversify export markets, and keep diplomatic channels open until the balance shifts. While over 85% of Canada's exports to the U.S. still move tariff-free under USMCA rules, Ottawa holds cards that are hard for Washington to replace: strategic minerals, integrated auto supply chains, and substantial oil and gas flows. By protecting these advantages and expanding reliable partnerships like the EU, Canada aims to withstand U.S. tariff pressure longer than Trump expects. The fight isn't just over rates and exemptions. It's about shaping the trade rules that will define North America for the next decade. On that front, Canada is determined not to play from behind.
You say, and now he could suddenly, all of a sudden, open up the USMCA. What would the impact be for Canada and for the U.S. if President Trump pulled out of that agreement?
He wants to hurt the American people, and that's exactly what he's doing. That a tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people.
Since August 1st, Canada's trade with the United States has faced its toughest strain in decades. Canada is now among the hardest hit by Trump's latest global tariff measures.
Across the entire country of Canada, it's probably closer to 20 million Americans rely on Canada for jobs, and vice versa. We rely on jobs with trade with the U.S., but it's just hurting both countries.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't wait to sound the alarm. Speaking directly to American viewers on CNN, he warned that Trump could end or reopen USMCA with a single signature, years ahead of the scheduled 2026 review. Ford stressed that these tariffs are not just punishing Canadian exporters, they are effectively taxing American consumers. He highlighted recent job losses in the United States, more than 37,000 manufacturing jobs lost since April, the lowest employment level in that sector in 5 years, and $6.2 billion in new costs for the U.S. auto industry. Ford's decision to take this message to us media wasn't just about defending Ontario. It aimed to build political pressure inside the United States, where the economic impact is already visible while Ford confronts Trump's tariff agenda head-on in public. Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking a different path, one defined by strategic patience and careful calculation.
Of course, the Prime Minister has to weigh all industries, not just the specific industries that are immediately impacted, but has to weigh industries against industries, has to weigh region against region and the unity of the country. Well, I think it's been a very wise and strategic, a cohesive approach on behalf of all Canadians.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's response has been deliberate. After the August 1st tariff increase, Ottawa did not announce a new round of retaliatory tariffs. Instead, Carney focused on keeping channels to Washington open and weighing the national interest across all sectors before taking action. Carney's approach relies on the fact that USMCA still protects most of Canada's trade. In June, Royal Bank of Canada data showed that 92% of Canadian exports to the US entered duty-free. The remaining 8%, mostly steel, aluminum, and other sensitive products, faced an average tariff of about 30%. Rather than rush into concessions, Carney's team is pursuing market diversification. Trade with the European Union has grown by double digits, exports to the United Kingdom are up, and high-level ministers have been in Mexico to coordinate strategy and avoid the divide and conquer tactics many in Ottawa expect from Trump in any USMCA.
What's the general impression of Trump in Canada?
He's probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada.
Ford and Carney are working toward the same goal, protecting Canada's economic position. But their methods could not be more different. Ford speaks in blunt terms, calling Trump the most disliked political figure in Canada and highlighting the American costs of tariffs. Carney stays measured, avoids personal attacks, and times his interventions to maximize leverage at the negotiating table. This dual-track public pressure and quiet diplomacy has so far kept Canada's response unified while signaling to Washington that Ottawa will not fold quickly. The threat of an early USMCA rupture is real. Trump has shown he's willing to move outside established timelines if it strengthens his bargaining position. Yet Canada retains leverage, strategic minerals critical to U.S. manufacturing, energy exports, and a strong agricultural trade. Trump also faces rising consumer prices and job losses at home, which could limit his room to escalate. The challenge for Canada will be to maintain its stance without closing the door on solutions that benefit both sides. The period since August 1st has revealed a high-stakes test of endurance between Washington and Ottawa. Trump is pressing hard, with tariffs to force action. Carney is meeting that pressure with strategic patience, while Ford raises the volume in the U.S. media. How long each side can hold its position, and what political costs Trump is willing to bear, will determine whether this standoff ends in a balanced agreement or a rupture that reshapes North American trade far sooner than planned.
Following the Swiss president's failure to reduce tariffs on her country after a visit to Washington earlier this week, the Financial Times is reporting that the U.S. has imposed tariffs on imports of 1 kilo gold bars, dealing a further blow to Switzerland, which is the biggest player in gold refining.
In early August 2025, Washington sent a jolt through global markets. President Donald Trump's administration confirmed a 39% tariff on imported gold bars, hitting Switzerland, the world's largest gold refining hub, head-on dot. It wasn't just a blow to a small European country's exports, it was a message. No commodity, however entrenched in global trade, is beyond the reach of Trump's tariff playbook. For Canada, watching from across the border, this was a clear warning. If gold can be targeted, so can other high-value sectors.
The only thing I can tell you from a European perspective right now is that all shipments are on hold. So basically there's no trading of gold bars between the Atlantic.
Until the first week of August, traders believed bullion would be spared. Gold bars in the 400-ounce form for central banks The 100-ounce size traded on COMEX and the 1-kilogram standard used in Asia were assumed to be outside the scope of tariffs. That changed when a Swiss refiner received a formal letter from U.S. Customs confirming that, under tariff code 710,813,550, these bars would face the full 39% duty. The immediate impact was severe. Gold shipments between the U.S. and Europe halted. Overnight, US gold prices climbed above European levels, creating an arbitrage gap. According to U.S. trade data, imports had surged earlier in 2025 to 43 metric tons in January alone, nearly double the average monthly U.S. refining output of 22 tons as buyers tried to front-load shipments before any policy change. Now, those stockpiles are all that remain to bridge the supply gap for the global gold market. This was more than a price shift, it was a sudden rupture in the supply chain for Canada. The lesson is clear. Gold may not be a major export to the U.S., but the same logic could apply to Canadian strategic minerals, energy products, or even high-end manufacturing. Ottawa knows that even sectors long considered safe under USMCA can be targeted. The gold shock showed how quickly decades-old trade flows can be disrupted by a single enforcement letter. And with Trump focused on bilateral trade imbalances, Canada's own surpluses in certain commodities could attract the same kind of attention Switzerland just experienced.
We have a lot to do in this country. We have a lot positive to do in this country, building this country in a way, building one Canadian economy.
I have all the confidence in the world in the Prime Minister. Donald Trump is very, very hard to deal with just because it's so fluid.
This is why Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach carries even more weight in the current climate. While Ford responds publicly with numbers, Carney is quietly keeping negotiation channels open. Even as Canada faces the 35% rate, he is deepening trade cooperation with Mexico, expanding links with the EU, and protecting domestic industries against sudden U.S. policy shifts. Canada's leverage lies in what the U.S. needs: strategic minerals, energy, and integrated automotive supply chains. The gold tariff episode only strengthens Ottawa's push to diversify export destinations and prepare contingency plans from steel and aluminum to copper and now gold. Trump is targeting sectors where the U.S. can exert maximum short-term leverage. The element of surprise keeps opponents off balance. It's a tactic designed to push trade partners toward concessions before they can mount a coordinated response. But with Canada, the strategy has met resistance. Carney and Ford are aligned in rejecting a bad deal and showing that Canada will not simply absorb US pressure without a counterplan. For Canada, the gold tariff is more than a dispute with Switzerland, it's a warning shot. Ottawa is combining public pushback with measured diplomacy, signaling it won't be outmaneuvered. The contest is no longer just about who can raise tariffs higher, it's about who can adapt faster to the shocks still to come.